Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me. Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. With the government and protesting farmers locked in negotiations, we today present a second set and very different set of answers to two critical questions. Should the minimum support price be made legally binding? And secondly, should it be calculated in terms of the C2 and 50% formula? In other words, comprehensive costs and 50% profit. Joining me today for today's discussion is the Professor of Economics at Jawaharlal Nehru University, Himanshu. Professor Himanshu, why do you believe making the minimum support price for 23 crops legally binding is the right way of helping farmers?
I think we have to look at what exactly does legally binding mean, in a sense. I mean, the government has been announcing the minimum support prices, the MSP, for more than 5 decades now. And it is something that is announced twice a year before the sowing season of the Rabi season and the Kharif season. The farmers are only asking that if you are announcing the minimum support price, which is what you have been announcing for the last more than 50 years, why don't you implement it? I think the simplest definition of guarantee is asking the government to basically do what it is normally supposed to do. If you announce an MSP in a gazette notification from the government, and then you do not implement it or do not act on it, then it is as good as a waste paper. I mean, you could simply put it in the dustbin and then go ahead with it. You can announce anything in the world and then not follow it up. What the farmers are basically saying that you have been announcing it, just act on it. And I think it's not a very difficult demand to understand. And I think it's perfectly legitimate demand for from the farmers to ask the government to do what it is supposed to do.
So if I understand you correctly, you're saying that what the farmers mean when they say make the minimum support price legally binding is please ensure that you implement it. In other words, legally binding means you have to implement it. You can't get out of doing so.
Absolutely. That's what exactly is. That's right now the MSP system is something which is not legally binding in the sense the government is free not to implement it. And it is something which is a waste paper. I mean, if it is not implemented. What they're basically saying that if there is a legislative binding to it, then the government is bound to implement it, bound to intervene as an MSP should be. And that is a very minimum demand. I mean, I think the government was doing its job on its own. Then there was no need for farmers to come on the streets and demand that make it a legally binding thing.
How do you respond to Ashok Gulati, who told me in an interview just 2 days ago that making the MSP legally binding would be anti-farmer? He says, when the MSP is higher than the market price, private traders will refuse to buy, thus either leaving farmers with an unsold surplus or forcing the government to step in and buy everything. The first, he says, would be tantamount to a disaster for farmers. The second would have a very adverse budgetary and fiscal implication for the government. How do you respond to this?
I mean, he is wrong on both counts. Let me just say that. First of all, making MSP a legal guarantee does not mean that every farmer is bound to sell it to the government. That is not what legally making MSP guarantee basically means. I mean, if the farmers see a higher price in the market, then they will sell it to the highest bidder. Simple as that. I mean, nobody is going to put a gun to your throat and say that, look, you have to sell it to me. That is not what MSP system is.
Can I interrupt?
Yeah.
There's no doubt that when the MSP is lower than the market price, farmers will sell to private traders because they benefit from doing so. The
Absolutely.
problem is when the opposite happens, when the MSP is lower than the market price, then what happens?
Then basically,
Sorry, I beg your pardon, the opposite. When the MSP is higher than the market price, then private traders won't come in at the MSP, and the government will either have to buy everything that farmers want to sell, or farmers will be left with unsold produce.
that
That's
is
the
where
problem.
that is where the legal guarantee basically comes in force. In the sense, the moment there is a MSP is higher than the market prices, the government is legally bound to intervene. Now, intervene does not basically mean that you go and buy everything that is produced as far as that particular crop is concerned. I mean, there are two ways in which the government's intention to intervene itself raises the market prices, because government is a large player. And so when government say that we are going to, say, for example, procure the particular commodity at the minimum support prices, that will itself put upward pressure on it. But you don't have to buy everything. You don't have to. Remember, I mean, that's a very simple example somebody gave on day before yesterday. I mean, look at it as basically a demand and supply kind of an exercise. I mean, and a simple example that was given earlier, I'm going to repeat it, is that why are the prices lower? The prices
Can I interrupt again? I apologize for these interruptions, but you're right when you say the government doesn't have to buy everything. But when there's an MSP, the government has to buy whatever farmers are making available for sale.
Correct.
And farmers will presumably sell everything they have.
Correct. But remember, when the government intervenes in the market and when it starts buying it, then prices are not going to remain exactly the same, because government is basically mopping up supply from the market. And the government, whenever the government is mopping up supply from the market, then it is basically, it's leading to a supply deficit. So the demand itself will be higher, and then the demand supply thing will come into force. Market prices will rise. And the moment the market prices rise and it comes to the level at the MSP, the government has to stop. So I'll give you an example of that. Is, say, for example, I mean, if you say, for example, pulses, take the example of pulses. In this country, suppose the demand for pulses is 30 million tons. If the farmers are producing 35 million tons, then the prices obviously are going to go down because there is excess supply in the market. Government has to basically come in the picture. It has to basically say that I am going to buy from the market. It is going to buy, say, for example, say 7 million tons. You are a situation where the demand is now 30 million tons, supply is 28 million tons, prices are going to go up. So what the government is basically doing is that mopping up what is called the excess supply.
Absolutely.
And therefore stabilizing the prices.
What you're saying is that there is a self-corrective mechanism inherent.
Absolutely.
The government buys as per the MSP, because then the prices will start coming down, and or the opposite will happen. Prices will start going up, and as a result of which the market price, which was below MSP, will become equal to MSP. And
Absolutely.
the government at that point can retreat from buying.
Absolutely. That's exactly the process. That is exactly what the MSP system is.
Let me quote to you a second concern put to me by Ashok Gulati. He says, according to a study done in 2018-19 and cited by the Business Standard on the 16th, only 8.8% of agricultural households sell any crop under MSP. Professor Gulati says now that figure is perhaps 10%. So clearly, MSP is not a concern for 90% of agricultural households. Why then should it be made legally binding?
Precisely because it is only 8%. Precisely because the government is only buying it for rice and wheat. Precisely because the government is not doing a job. The government is supposed to do its job, and if the government is basically procuring for or intervening in the market, even for the other crops, that number is going to go up. So government's inefficiency cannot be an argument for not implementing what we should normally be implementing. In fact, the answer is in the figure that he's pointing out. The current MSP system is very much lopsided. It needs reform. It is geographically concentrated in certain states. It is only operational as far as rice and wheat is concerned. And it is only basically happening because you require a certain amount of food grains for your public distribution system. I think that is wrong. That is not what the MSP system is. If you intervene in other crops, it will lead to a larger number of farmers benefiting. It will lead to larger crops. It will lead to crop diversification. It will be an incentive for other farmers to grow different kind of crops. And precisely why we should have a legal guarantee. Why
So
we
you're
should not
saying
let the
two
government
things,
go?
aren't you? You're saying one, this figure of 8.8% or 10% using MSP is artificially low only because the government is not intervening and applying MSP to crops other than wheat and rice. Were it to do so, 10% will probably rise to 20 or 30%.
Absolutely.
And the thing you're saying is once the MSP applies to other crops than wheat and rice, to the other 21 crops, diversification of agriculture will start to happen, from which not only agriculture, but states like Punjab in particular will benefit. Farmers will begin to move away from crops that are dependent upon irrigation and therefore unsuited to Punjab to other crops which now have an MSP. They'll have the incentive to do so.
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, the agricultural scientists in Punjab have been saying this, that if you really want a crop diversification to happen, then you have to basically implement the MSP system for other crops. I mean, the fact that you're only subsidizing, only procuring, or MSP system is only functioning for rice and wheat, is leading to a distorted agricultural system where the water table is going down, but the farmer is only growing rice and wheat simply because the government is only available to buy or intervening in the market for rice and wheat. So I think you're perfectly right. The number will go up. Might go up to 20%, might go up to 30%. We don't know. But it will be geographically far more widespread. It will be, the government will have to go to other states where, for example, coarse cereals are grown, or for example, edible oil seeds are grown, or for example, where pulses are grown. Remember, we are importing pulses. 20% of our pulses are imported. We are importing 70% of our edible oil. And all of this is happening because the government is using the MSP system only to favor certain crops.
Okay. In other words, if you were to apply the MSP system properly as you're meant to all the other crops than wheat and rice, the need to import edible oils also will diminish because we'll start producing them ourselves because there'll be an MSP cover to do so. Let me then raise a second issue put to me by Professor Gulati 3 days ago. He says high-flying sectors of Indian agriculture like poultry, which he claims is growing at 8 and 9%, fisheries, which he says is growing at 7 and 8%, and milk, which he says is growing at 5 and 6%, do not have access to any MSP regime, and yet they are flourishing. He says this clearly means that a legally binding MSP is not necessary for agricultural growth.
No, I mean, again, you have to look at it in two ways. One is that simply because the other sectors are doing quite well, doesn't mean that for the 55%, which are what we call as the crop cultivation sector, the crop sector, which is where the agriculture, and remember, 75% of the population which is engaged in agriculture is involved in some kind of a crop sector, which is the largely what we are talking about. Now, those are the people, they need support. Now, the point cannot be that simply because those guys are doing well, and therefore you cannot apply the same thing there. But my point is simply this, that one is that the farmers here, at least on crop sector, on certain crops, we are not giving the same kind of incentive that one should be giving. And that is something which the government, normally all governments do it. And it's not just India I'm talking about, it's all government that do it. And we should be doing that, irrespective of what is happening. Milk sector is doing well, poultry sector is doing well. That will continue to do well. How is it harming the crop sector? I mean, if the farmers is basically suffering in the crop sector, the people who are growing pulses and people who are growing all seeds, you can't go and tell them that, look, those guys are doing well and therefore you don't need support. I don't understand that kind of an argument.
What you're saying is just because poultry, fisheries, and milk are doing well without an MSP is not an argument for denying MSP to the crop sector.
It's obvious, isn't it obvious? I mean, you can't go and tell a worker that, look, the CEOs are getting good amount of money and they are getting millions, and therefore I should not do anything to you. Okay. Is that the logic that you are going to go and tell it to the people? I mean, are you going to tell say, for example, somebody who is Dalit or somebody who is an OBC, that look, the upper caste are doing so well, they are working on their merit, and therefore my job is not to help you. I mean, you don't do that.
In which case, let me ask you, Professor Himanshu, do you have an estimate of what a legally binding MSP for 23 crops would cost? The Times of India on the 15th put it at 10 lakhs. But surely an MSP would vary crop by crop, region by region, and it would depend upon what the market price is and how much the government has to make up and for how long it has to make up. And therefore, CRISIL has come up with a very different figure. As opposed to Times of India claiming that it's 10 lakh crore, CRISIL says it could be as low as 21,000 crore. Which of the two figures do you believe is more accurate, 10 lakh crore or 21,000 crore?
I think the CRISIL figure is more closer to, is actually closer to what would likely to be the case. In fact, it's very difficult for us to make a guess because the government is not intervening. We can only know what is going to happen only if the government decides to intervene. What is likely to be the prices in the coming future, this year or next year, or we don't know that. Now, the 10 lakh figure is something which is really absurd. It's something which is completely, I would say that, figment of imagination and has no real basis in that sense. Let me give you, give me 2 minutes and let me explain what exactly do we mean by cost. Remember, as an accounting exercise, I can simply tell you that the fact that you buy certain crops is not your cost, because on the asset side, you have the grains with you or the agricultural produce with you, which you can sell. And technically, you can actually make profits if you sell it at a price higher than what the price that you bought. Or, for example, you can make losses, which is basically when you sell it at a price lower than the price that which you have basically been bought and buying. Now, the cost for the government is only the loss that it makes by selling the grains. It is not the cost of buying, because in accounting framework, if you buy certain things, then there is a right-hand account. You have assets that you're holding on to it. The 10 lakh crore, I don't know where the number comes in. But even if you start buying everything that is produced, which is available in the market, remember, not everything that is produced by the farmer is available in the market. It is some of them are basically kept as for self-consumption, some of them basically used for intermediate consumption or wherever it is used. What comes in the market is the only one which is available for you for buying in the market. Even then, it will not be 10 lakh crores or 18 lakh crores, the number that is being bandied around. But it is not a cost to the government. It is not something which is coming out of your fiscal part of your, subsidy or part of your expenditure part of it.
The cost to the government is only the difference between the price at which it buys and the price at which it thereafter sells. That is the cost to the government. And that, as you say, clearly is not going to be anywhere near 10 lakh crore. Let me at this point put to you and ask you what you think of the terms of negotiation that are being discussed in the papers. These are only newspaper reports at the moment. They're not confirmed by either side. But apparently, in the talks that happened on Sunday last night, the government offered a 5-year commitment to buy pulses, maize, and cotton. That may be a legal commitment for 5 years. We don't know for sure. But clearly, it's not a commitment of very long standing. It's only for 5 years. So, as a talking point brought up by the government, which the farmers have said they'll take 2 days to respond to, how do you respond to this?
I would say that don't make it for 5 years or 6 years or 10 years. MSP system is a long-standing system. It is used by every country that you can think of where agriculture is being supported by the government. Why keep it only for 5 years? You can keep it. For example, if the market prices are anyway higher than the MSP that you're offering, you have absolutely no commitment. You don't have to intervene in the market. Why are you saying that after 5 years, we are not going to honor it? You have to keep on doing it as long as the farmers, the situation is like that. Tomorrow there is a crisis. You have to intervene. I don't understand. If you're willing to do it now and willing to do it for only 5 years, why not simply implement what you have been offering as an MSP system?
In other words, if you're going to do it without any time bar. Don't put an artificial, arbitrary time bar of 5 years.
Absolutely. There is no reason why. Why it should only be 5 years.
Okay.
It can be only last. Say for example, 2 years. Say for example, after 2 years, if the prices of maize and other commodities is higher than the MSP that you're announcing, no farmer is going to sell you. You don't have to do anything.
Let's come to a second connected question. It's to do with how should MSP be calculated. Farmers are insisting that it should be on the basis of C2 plus 50, which is comprehensive cost plus 50% profit. On this specific issue, what is your position?
See, let me say that this is something which has been in discussion for more than 20 years now. The first time that idea that the comprehensive cost should be used for providing MSP or for providing minimum support prices came with the Abhijit Sen Committee long-term grain policy report. And that was during the Vajpayee government. And that was during the Vajpayee government when the report was published. And the Vajpayee government, technically at least, accepted that, okay, this is something, the long-term grain policy was accepted at that point of time. The Swaminathan Commission reiterated that. And so far, I don't think any government has basically opposed saying that it should not be more linked to the C2. C2 or the comprehensive cost is important simply because there are costs which the farmer has to incur, which are imputed costs, and those costs need to be factored in. And after all, the farmer is not doing a charity; he is just doing a business, and you have to provide remunerative prices. And this is something which all governments have been saying. So
Let me
what is
put
wrong
you a
in doing
concern.
that?
Let me put you a concern, Professor Himanshu. No one would dispute that the C2 part of the formula has to be honored and met, because those are the actual costs, whether it's imputed land cost or imputed family labor, those are the actual costs that have to be met. It's the 50% profit part that Swaminathan Iyer, writing in the Times of India yesterday, Sunday, quarreled about. He says, nowhere in any industry do you guarantee a 50% profit above all guaranteed costs. He says it shouldn't be C2 plus 50%. It should be C2 plus a much smaller percentage of guaranteed profit. How do you respond to that? The 50% he says is too much.
Remember, agriculture is a completely different subject altogether. Agriculture is something which is heavily subsidized all over the world. The European Union, I'll give you one example of it. The European Union gives 500 billion euros of subsidy. And during the 2008 financial crisis, they cut down on the austerity program on every item except for agriculture. Even during the COVID pandemic or other places. And US, Trump, for example, he increased the subsidy that is being given to. Our farmers are now competing with a globally subsidized agriculture system, which is the subsidy levels are very high. You have to basically protect the farmers. You have to give them some kind of.
But can I interrupt? Does the European Union guarantee a 50% profit above all comprehensive costs?
No, they follow a different kind of subsidy model, which is a direct income transfer. They follow a different thing. But remember, they also have a price support intervention program. So it's not that
do they guarantee a 50% profit? Because that's
No,
what Swaminathan Iyer is quarreling about. He says 50% is too high.
I'm not saying that when the 50% is a sacrosanct number. It is something that the government will have to basically come to a number and say that. But the 50% number is something that has been accepted by the various governments in consultation, saying that this is something which gives you a remunerative price. Remember, our farmers are the poorest farmers. They don't have 200 hectares or 500 hectares of land.
But you're saying a very important thing. When you say 50% is not a sacrosanct number, you're saying you personally would be open to that 50% perhaps coming down to 40, 30, 25.
I have no idea. This is something which has to be looked at by looking at the condition of the farmers. You have to basically look at it. We are not here, farmers we are not saying that you just make up a little markup and that is your profit. Remember, for us, 80% of our farmers are small farmers. This is something which is the agriculture as an industry has to be also remunerative for them. They have to basically be profitable and profitable to an extent where they basically continue to be in agriculture. We are not talking about 200 hectare farmers. We are not talking about 500 hectare farmers. We are talking about the poorest section of our population, and a lot of calculations that were done to arrive at those numbers. They said that if you really want agricultural production to increase, agricultural investment to increase, you have to incentivize them. You have to basically give them 50%. Now that 50% can go up to 60%. For example, in edible oil, you might be required to give a larger incentive. You might be required to give a 70%. And that is what is an accepted instrument. This is what is called incentive price. Let me give you an example of it. The current government also in Madhya Pradesh, in Chhattisgarh, when they announce a bonus over and above on MSP. Now that bonus is an incentive price. So you can actually do that. Tomorrow, if the cost of cultivation goes down, if the farmers are finding it to be like agriculture is remunerative enough, you can basically have a different MSP. I'm not stuck on the 50% point of it. But
I take your point.
Realistic assessment of what exactly is required.
Let me at this stage put to you two consequences that Ashok Gulati put to me if MSP were to be calculated at C2 plus 50%. He says it would increase the cost of food by 25 to 30%, which he says will have a huge impact on inflation right across the economy. How do you respond to that concern that C2 plus 50% will increase the price of food by up to 30% with a major impact on the rest of the economy in terms of inflation?
Again, all of this is a figment of imagination. First of all, let me put it very clearly. For wheat, for example, I'm giving an example of the last 2 years. Wheat, for example, prices were much higher than the MSP. Almost 500 rupees higher than the MSP that was announced by the government. It has been the case for the rice also. It has been the case for this particular year as well. We haven't seen food inflation going to 25%. Food inflation has been double digits, has been at 8%, 9% or 10%. That has been the case. For the remaining crops, remember there is an important inflation. We are importing 70% of our edible oil. A large part of that was coming from sunflower, imported edible oil that was coming from Ukraine, that was coming from Russia, that were coming from other places. We are paying a huge price through our nose. And some of the prices, the price inflation that we're talking about is something that is also dependent on why, because we are not cultivating enough. If there is an excess supply, if the farmers are incentivized, the production increases, then the prices will go down. Why do you assume that the production is not going to, farmers are not going to respond to the incentive? Give them the incentive, supply will increase. You might be in a situation that there is an excess supply and prices actually cool down. I mean, you're assuming that, I mean, there is only one way and the production is going to be constant and farmers are not going to respond to all of these. The market conditions are not going to change. A lot of things depend. I mean, work in deciding what is the supply and what is the demand.
Let me then put a second consequence Ashok Gulati says will emerge if MSP is fixed at C2 plus 50%. He says at the moment, and for the next presumably 5 years, the government is committed to giving free wheat and rice to over 800 million people. He says if MSP is fixed at C2 plus 50%, this would hugely increase the cost for government, which would either kick up the government's fiscal deficit or substantially reduce resources for other essential expenditure like health, education, and indeed even for agricultural development itself.
Let me put it like let me put it very last 2 years from March 2020 onwards up to 2022 December, this government was giving double the amount at free cost rice and wheat to 80 crore population. Now, at that point of time, the government did not go bankrupt. Now, you are telling me that simply, and remember, it is double. The food subsidy bill basically became roughly around 5 lakh crore rupees. The government did not go bankrupt. So this argument that government is going to bankrupt simply because, and also I think I mean, all of these, you look at the press statement that is coming out from the government. Government is actually claiming that our MSP is actually C2 plus 50%. I mean, it may not be actually the C2 plus 50% for majority of the crops, but at least they are claiming that it is already 50%. So where is the price increase that you're talking about? Government is not going to bankrupt, number one. Secondly, remember, MSP is for supporting the farmers. The NFSA commitment is because there is an act that has been passed. You are going to the town, tom-tomming saying that I have been giving 80 crore free ration to 80 crore population. And that is a subsidy that is going from there. That is not a subsidy to the farmers. That is a subsidy to the consumers. What the farmers are saying that farmer is basically selling their grains, rice and wheat at minimum prices. This is minimum support prices. They're not setting at the maximum prices.
You make a very convincing point when you say right through COVID, the government was giving double the quantity of free food gain and it didn't go bankrupt. It didn't have a problem finding resources for other essential expenditure. Why, when you halve the quantity, are you becoming concerned either about bankruptcy or a decline in resources for other essential expenditure? Let me put two further thoughts to you. Rather than help farmers through legally binding MSPs, there is a view that they should be given income support, which I believe is the practice in China, which is another country with small agricultural holdings like we do. The argument is income support would leave farmers free to decide whether they want to spend the money on seed, power, fertilizer, or whatever. The choice would be theirs. But you would still be giving them the money to ensure a decent livelihood. How do you respond to this? It was made to me by Ashok Gulati. I see he's written an article on it in today's Indian Express. Do you think we should move away from MSP towards a sort of, in quotes, Chinese-style income support for small agricultural holding farmers?
These are not mutually exclusionary in the sense, I mean, they're actually complementary. They're not substitute of each other. I mean, nobody is stopping you to give your income support. The government is anyway giving income support since 2019. The PM Kisan is already functional. So there is an income support that is already being given to farmers. The problem is that when you think of MSP as an income support program, let me tell you that even in America, government gives direct contribution to farmers, but they do have a price support program. Price support programs are a different kind of an instrument. They're a different kind of instrument. They're meant to stabilize prices in the economy. Look at the benefit that you have a price stabilization program. The price stabilization program will basically make sure that the prices of essential food grains, essential agricultural commodities for the economy is going to be very stable. It will not lead to inflationary surge. It will lead to self-sufficient production of the agricultural commodities. The problem here is that if you are thinking of it as some kind of an income support program, I am not saying that the MSP is this is something which is a complete misnomer. It's something which is a complete wrong understanding of how agricultural markets work. If the prices are stable, the benefits that come because of various, the government is spending a huge amount of money for this inflation management or inflation targeting, or RBI spends a huge amount of money in indirect costs that basically go into all of these issues. A price stabilization program is very different from an income support program. You can have both. Who is basically telling you that you basically not have an income support program? You want to give income support, you give double the income support that you're currently giving. Instead of 6,000, you give 20,000, you give 30,000. But MSP has nothing to do with that. MSP is a price stabilization program. You will still need it even if you're giving 1 lakh rupees per month to every farmer, because that is for inflation price stabilization program that has nothing to do with incomes.
In other words, it's not an either or situation. Very possibly you need both at the same time operating together.
Absolutely. And if you have make a choice between income support program and MSP program, I would prefer an MSP program because that's good for the growth of the economy. I need a price stabilization. I need inflation to be under control. I need it for the consumers. I need it for the industry. I need it for the capitalists. And that is something which is important. Why should that be sacrificed for your income support program?
Let me then put a second thought to you. The real concern, people say, is to find effective ways of increasing real incomes for farmers. How then do you respond to the view that rather than grow rice in Punjab, which is an environmentally unwise choice, we need to incentivize Punjabi farmers, to take them as an example, to move to high-value agriculture like fruits, vegetables, livestock, fisheries? How do you respond to that argument that this is the direction in which we should be incentivizing farmers to move?
That's where I think of the farmer as a businessman. And the moment you start thinking of farmer as a businessman, you have all the answers. Farmers are not here to do charities. They are not here to grow rice and wheat for you because you have to run whatever program that you want to run. They have a particular plot of land. If they find that I am growing some other crop and that is more remunerative, they'll shift to that. And the farmers from Punjab will shift to it. Farmers from Haryana will shift to it. But for that, you will have to give them incentive. And I gave an example of edible oil. Remember, the Punjabi cuisine is known for makke di roti and sarso ka saag. The sarso has disappeared. I mean, sarso is the edible oil. I mean, because that's not remunerative. If you give them the incentive, give them the stable prices, then the stable prices will lead to higher production of edible oil. You will basically save foreign exchanges. They will do it on their own but remember, that has to be remunerative.
Absolutely.
And farmers are willing to do it.
And you spoke about this earlier in this interview when you said if MSP is properly applied to all the other 21 crops beyond wheat and rice, you will be providing sufficient incentive to farmers to grow those instead of growing rice in a place like Punjab where you don't have the water required for paddy. In other words, treat farmers like businessmen, give them the incentive, and they will automatically themselves diversify. And similarly, if you want them to move to fruit, veg, livestock, and fisheries, provide the incentive for them to do so, and they will do it.
I mean, just giving an example, you have the PLI scheme for industry. You are basically giving some kind of subsidy to the industry to have certain kind of a industry to be set up in your country. You are doing that. You are basically, why can't you do it for agriculture? Why can't you give to the farmers that, look, if you grow pulses, I am going to give you this kind of this is a stable price, and I am willing to assure that we are not going to make losses. Why don't you do that? We are spending a hell lot of foreign exchange for all of these issues. Okay. If you give them that kind of this kind of an incentive structure, farmers will remember. The farmers of this country have taken this country out of from say, for example, food shortage, to given them a green revolution where you are now surplus of it. Give them the opportunity.
Do you think this is being tangentially hinted at when the government says that for 5 years they will give an MSP commitment for pulses, maize, and cotton? It's only a 5-year commitment, and it's not sure as yet whether it's going to be legally happening. But is it being tangentially hinted at here?
I think, I really don't see the logic of why should you do it only for pulses and maize and some crop for about 5 years. I mean, you should, again, I'm reiterating, The government is looking at this as a way of basically placating the farmers. This is kind of what you call it as a palliative. I mean, like, take this and then basically keep quiet. I am simply saying that implement the MSP as it should be implemented.
And
Look at
that
it
will provide the incentive on its own for diversification, which you want to see.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm just saying that follow the principle rather than looking at it as a small time solution. You follow the principle. This is a principle that we have followed. That is have given us benefit during the green revolution. That is how it has worked out. That is how it has worked out for milk. That is how it has worked out for other things. Why can't you do it? I mean, you do what you are basically supposed to do. When you bring out a paper gazette notification, you just act on it. I mean, what's wrong? What is the big deal about it?
I take your point. My last question, and it's to do with something that you've repeatedly tangentially hinted at right through this interview. It's the belief that the core problem in India is that governments, not just the Modi government, but governments historically, have what's called a pro-consumer bias. They care more about controlling inflation for urban populations than helping farmers increase their income. Do you agree with that view? You've hinted at it in many of your answers. I'm now asking you up front. Do you think that that's one of the problems, that our governments have a pro-consumer bias which works against farmers? At the very least, we need a level playing field.
Let me put it very straight. I mean, I would not call it as a pro-consumer bias, but I will just simply say that the government has not done enough for the farmers as it should have done. You are doing you're basically implementing the National Food Security. Again, National Food Security Act is not a consumer subsidy in that sense. It is something that you have to do it simply because this country is on nutrition charts. Whether you look at you don't want to believe it, Global Index, don't believe in it. But if you look at simply the NFHS numbers or other numbers, your malnutrition numbers are close to sub-Saharan Africa. And I'm not saying anything about sub-Saharan Africa, and they are doing actually better, and they are basically improving. But you are basically a large amount of large section of your population is not getting nutritious food. And this is a food security intervention. For food security intervention, we are supposed to do it. The parliament has passed it. You supported it. You shouted vocally on it. Now you're doing it, but don't say that this is something which I'm doing it for the farmers. I'm saying that this is a double standard. If you're doing it, say that I'm doing the NFSA for nutrition improvement. That is also needed in this economy. But doesn't mean that you are not going to do it for the agricultural sector. So one has to be very clear on what is your goal, what is the instrument that you're using, and everything has a different instrument. But you can't basically be using NFSA as a tool to say that is a food subsidy I'm giving to the farmers. That is not a subsidy to the farmers. That is a nutrition intervention. Let it be. Strengthen it. I'm saying strengthen it. Give edible oil and pulses in the food security program, because the malnutrition program in this country also requires proteins where deficiency is much higher. We require fats where edible oil is going to help you.
Let me then end by picking up on a sentence in a piece you wrote for the Indian Express on the 17th, Saturday, 2 days ago. I'm quoting from your piece. You said, "It is unfair to treat the cost of procuring rice and wheat as the cost of the MSP program for rice and wheat. In fact, almost all of it is a subsidy to consumers and not to farmers."
Absolutely.
My question is a very simple one because it will occur to the audience. Can you explain how MSP for rice and wheat is a subsidy for consumers, not farmers?
Remember, farmers are growing rice and wheat. The government is buying their rice and wheat at minimum prices. This is not maximum, and I reiterate, the first word in MSP is minimum. So at the minimum prices, farmers are only selling their produce to the government at the minimum support prices. After that, if the government decides to basically sell it for free to the 80 crore consumers, then it is subsidy to the consumers. It is not a subsidy to the farmers. If you were giving higher prices to the farmers, to the maximum prices, then I would have understood it. Now, this is where the problem lies. At some point of time, the American government was basically buying grains from the American farmers and dumping it in the Pacific Ocean, or giving as food aid to Africa and other places. That's something which is there. Here, what I'm saying is that the entire amount that you are basically selling to the consumers, 80 crore consumers at free, is a subsidy to the consumers. The farmers are not getting the subsidy. They're getting a minimum value, minimum support price that you have announced, at which the farmer is selling its produce. They're not getting a subsidy. They are basically selling their produce.
Do you think that once this distinction is understood, and that the MSP is viewed as a subsidy for consumers, not as a subsidy for farmers, some of the hesitation, some of the reluctance to increase MSP levels, some of the reluctance to make it legally binding will disappear. That it emerges out of a misunderstanding rather than out of any rational appreciation of the problem.
I don't think the government has any misunderstanding. I mean,
No,
I
I'm
think
talking about public opinion.
public opinion, obviously, public opinion should change. Public should realize that the subsidy that the food subsidy that we are talking about is largely a subsidy to the consumers. It is not a subsidy to the farmers, but we certainly need to incentivize the farmers to be able to produce more. And that is something which is very much necessary. And we are not doing a good job of it, despite the claims that we are basically helping the farmers. And in fact, my point is also that if you have a proper MSP process and the MSP stabilization process, it is likely to lead to multiple impacts of it. I mean, there's investment is going to increase. The government will have to invest more. There is a complementary impact of that. I mean, the price will be stable, and there will be a lot of indirect impacts on the economy. So I think of the MSP as something which is beneficial to the economy largely, not just to the farmers. And I think once you look at that, then I think there should not be any hesitation in making it as a legal guarantee.
Professor Himanshu, thank you very much for explaining things so clearly to the audience. Take care, stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.